Can you feel nostalgic for the future? And I'm not talking like you grew up on the Back to the Future movies or you really love those futuristic levels from Crash 3. Although, those were the best levels in that game. Hands down, hands down. But I'm talking nostalgia from an era that has not come to pass. The simple answer is no, that's impossible. Both in terms of concept in regards to nostalgia and time. Nostalgia is something you can only feel when it comes to experience. And when it comes to time, we live in the present. The past is behind us and the future doesn't exist and will never exist. Every day that goes by doesn't become the future, it just becomes the new present. But what if I now told you that not only did we get a glimpse into the future, but some of us even lived in it for a while too? You'd probably say something like, "You're crazy, that's impossible. Also, how'd you break into my house? What do you want? And did you really eat all 50 slices of my American cheese from the fridge?" Dude, come on. And to that I say it's true. About the cheese thing, but also the future thing. You see, let me take you to the far off time period that is the 90s. The 90s were known for a lot of things. Tamagotchi, AOL, scented markers that probably got kids into huffing paint, Kurt Cobain's slap bracelets, Kurt Cobain's death, butterfly hair clips, and whatever bullshit BuzzFeed lists in their 90s kids articles. I mean, let's just take a look here. Oh, here we go. How the magazine section at Tower Records was the best magazine section anywhere, and how you'd low-key open up the magazines that were wrapped in plastic so you could read them. I mean, sure, put it on the list. But amongst all of that, there was the Y2K aesthetic. Now, at first glance, the Y2K aesthetic, also referred to as K-Bug, just seems like the late 90s take on the future, which isn't too uncommon. Seemingly, almost every decade has participated in what is referred to as retrofuturism. Retrofuturism is basically when artists illustrate what they believe the future to look like, either through concept art, literature, film, whatever. And their interpretations can be as fantastical as they want to be or as grounded as they want to be. However, no matter what, you can always definitely tell what time period they came from. I mean, it's the future, but god damn does it reek of 1950s. And the same goes for this. I mean, this just oozes late 90s. But what made the Y2K aesthetic so special is that it encapsulated everything. I'm talking fashion, music, video games, movies, marketing, toys, art, just how things looked in general. I mean, fuck! You wouldn't steal a car! Not only did this whole aesthetic infect every facet of medium out there, but it stuck around for a while too. I'm talking mid-90s to early 2000s here. Now, I have my own insight on why it stuck around for a while, but more importantly, I have to talk about how it even began. Now, through my own research, and what I mean by that is typing in Y2K aesthetic and clicking the first link, my findings report 3 distinct things that came out to act as a catalyst for the whole aesthetic. Those 3 things being the release of the movie Hackers, Wipeout the PS1 game, and Windows 95, along with a bunch of music videos that I'll get to later on. I mean, Windows 95 was big when it came out, because before that, the only people with home computers were greased up turbo virgins, but after that dropped, any regular run-of-the-mill turbo virgin could have a home computer. It was that accessible. And then Hackers dropped, which painted these computer nerds as these cool punk-like characters. And I mean, you can just watch the trailer to that film and see how much of the fashion sense carried over to the Y2K aesthetic. And Wipeout is just a futuristic racing game, very much akin to the likes of F-Zero. But the box art was something special. Its font and graphic design would become the blueprint for others to follow. This box art was also made by Designers Republic, who also made album covers for countless records in the same vein, thus perpetuating the style even further. Now, it should also go without saying that music heavily influences pop culture, and with the 90s being identified as the MTV generation, of course music videos had a big part to play in establishing the look. Some early pioneers include videos like Spice Girls' Say You'll Be There, Michael and Janet Jackson's Scream, and of course, Will Smith's Getting Jiggy With It. Of course, there's other examples like Eiffel 65 and Backstreet Boys, but those music videos came out after the aesthetic was already established. And while we're talking music, I would also just like to point out that with the rise of Y2K came the rise of electronic music. Your EDMs, your technos, your Eurobeats, your electronicas not only sound futuristic and play into the overall aesthetic, but it also makes sense. With the rise of technology, something I'll touch upon later, musicians all of a sudden had new ways to make music. All of this is in such stark contrast to the decade's previous obsession with grunge. Grunge encompasses reality. The vocals are raw and real, and the instruments are imperfect. A Nirvana cassette is completely different from like a Jock Jams cassette. You know what I'm saying? And what can be found in the music also translates over to the grunge fashion, which consisted of beat up Converse, ripped acid wash jeans, and long, natural, uncombed hair. Comparing that to the Y2K fashion sense, and it seems crazy how fast an aesthetic can take over despite being polar opposites. Although it's not too crazy. Generally, through my own observations, every decade starts out on one particular theme, and by the end of the decade, a new theme has replaced it that's completely opposite. Like, the early 60s was very much all about the stereotypical nuclear family and pro-capitalism, and then by the end of the decade, it was all about smoking dope and living peacefully on a commune. But that doesn't explain why the aesthetic stuck around. Or rather, I should be explaining why did something that was seemingly just another decade's take on retrofuturism become an aesthetic. Because the answer to why it stuck around is because it became an aesthetic. Basically, it all boils down to the setting. We were entering the new millennium, the year 2000. It kind of felt like it too with the way technology was advancing. Analog forms of media like cassettes and VHSs were being replaced by compact discs, which not only were easier and less spacious to store, but were able to hold more data on it too. Also, video games were now in 3D, and you didn't have to own an arcade cabinet or a PC to experience the third dimension. CGI was becoming more prevalent in both movies and just art in general, and cell phones were becoming more compact and smaller and affordable. And the fucking internet is a thing now. I think growing up, kids always seem to have the notion that by the time they're adults, flying cars will exist. Of course, it's a crazy notion, but for the first time with the way technology was advancing and the fact that we were finally entering the new millennium, it truly felt like flying cars were right around the corner. It truly felt like we were entering the future. And then it all went away. We eventually crossed over into the new millennium, and reality hit. 9/11 happened, along with countless anthrax scares and the Iraq War. This wasn't the future we predicted. This wasn't the future we lived in for the latter half of a decade. Any optimism for the new millennium dwindled. It was fun to skeptically partake in the widespread conspiracy theory that was the Y2K bug. A theory that stated as soon as 1999 rolled over to the year 2000s, computers wouldn't understand and launch all the missiles and nukes and essentially create an apocalypse scenario. A theory so extreme and grandiose, it seems like something a child would say, and yet we all found it amusing, and some of us even took it seriously. Simply because the line between fiction and reality was oftentimes blurred given the nature of the Y2K aesthetic. So when actual tragedy struck, we had to put away our toys and stop playing pretend and come to terms with the harsh reality that laid before us. However, that being said, the Y2K aesthetic didn't exactly die off. Remnants still linger in things like Vaporwave or the McBling aesthetic. McBling specifically is seen as the direct predecessor or spiritual successor of the Y2K aesthetic. Just throwing that out there. And I've talked about this before in my used video games video, but the late 90s and early 2000s nostalgia is on an all-time high right now. And a lot of people are starting to reminisce on the Y2K aesthetic. It's evident by Twitter accounts like Echo, I think that's how you pronounce it, who gained a large following as of recent. Also, shout out to Echo for being the main inspiration for this video. Go throw him a follow if you're feeling nostalgic for this era like I am. You won't regret it. I guess the main takeaway is that nothing has ever gone for good because they'll always live on in our memories. We may never live in the future that was depicted, but it's okay because we kinda already did. Also, can we please start making things in colorful see-through plastic again? Oh my God, that was the best. Everybody's saying how good the new PS5 controllers look, but they ain't got shit on the Atomic Purple Nintendo 64 controller. What you know about it?